The English created the Alemannic alliance, which meant all men, but it came to be dominated by the Franks, or Charlemagne as he's best well known, who was a contemporary of Offa the Great of England and Mercia, who built the famous Offa's Dyke to keep the Welsh at bay on the borders between Wales and England. Well, the Franks had two major achievements. First, they replaced the Goths as the defenders of Europe against Islam, because southern Spain was controlled by the Muslims there, and they defeated the Muslims there in southern Spain. They also stopped the eastward progression of the steppeland peoples, who composed of Germanic and Mongolian peoples and Turkic peoples, which made up the Magyars, the Huns, and later the Mongol hordes, which would arrive in the 13th century. At present, I'm talking about roundabout between the era between Hengist and Horsa, which was 447, and Alfred the Great, which was in the 800s AD. Now, the Franks converted to Christianity because of the heavy Roman influence on the second most Romanized area outside of Italy itself, which was Gaul, which the Franks took over and turned into the Frank Reich, as the Germans call it even today, or France. France was thus the melding of a Nordic and Celtic peoples back together again. And just as the English had subdued the Celts in Britain, they were also, through apartheid and slavery, the English were also using the Celts as soldiers rather than the Germanic people, because there was a limited amount of those people available to them. Slowly, the two cultures of Nordic English and Celtic Welsh were slowly meshing together to form a new form of Englishness, one that was rooted deep within Britain itself rather than being a Baltic identity. Still, the Nordic element was extremely strong, as the rituals with the berserker rituals and other things from the mainland show. The warrior culture didn't change. It could still be said to have been unchanged till now. The English still don't take no shit from anyone, to pardon the language, but that's true. We make our own rune. Now, the Irish contribution is quite stark, because it's often overlooked that the Irish did help save Europe from what Victorians called the Dark Ages, but I prefer to call it the Migration Age, because it does show, it's more descriptive, and it tells us exactly what happened, that the English migrated from Europe to Britain on a large scale. We're talking maybe up to 2 million people, when there was only 2 million Welsh people living in Britain. Half of those the English killed off. So the Welsh lost 50% of their population. That's more than even in the English Civil War, where 25% of the population were killed due to Charles I, who was a bastard. But you can't lay all of this down on Hengist and Horsa themselves, because Hengist, of course, was only one part responsible for that whole genocide that was carried on by successive kings, good and bad kings, because there were good and bad kings in Anglo-Saxon England. It wasn't just that the Normans were terrible. The Normans were worse than the Anglo-Saxons, but the Anglo-Saxons did have bad kings. That's undeniable. But the Irish influence on them through Christianity was offered the glittering prospect of bringing together the education of Rome and Greece through that Christian learning from the Irish, who had maintained it in written form, but albeit with some Christian overtones, to bring that together with the heroic Nordic culture, and thus produce something of amazingness, such as the Battle of Maldon or Beowulf the poem, or there are many Celtic influences on English literature because of that. But what were they saving Europe from? Were they saving it from the Magyars? Were they saving it from from Islam? Yes, they were, but they were also saving it from the Vikings. And the Vikings were Nordic, but they were using Germanic soldiers, and thus the further reinforcing of that element, which is still to this day causing problems, right? Because the Germanic people were not Europeans; they are Asians. From northwest China originally, thousands and thousands of years ago. I'm talking 5,000 years ago, but the race itself has not changed. Nordic and Germanic are very, very different from each other. Nordic is closer to Celtic, really. But to describe the beginning of the Viking Age, the shock that people could not sail as Hengist and Horsa did along the coast and then jump across the English Channel, but sail directly out to sea and jump like the Viking longship was the equivalent in its day of a stealth bomber. So I'll just read you what Alfred the Great was saving Britain from by educating Britain and educating and anglicising Britain, making it English through education and through the training of the English warrior. Alfred the Great and his son, Athelstan the Great, who would later on go on to unify the entire country, were the heirs of the West Saxons by Cynric, Ael and Cedric. They were mercenary captains just like Hengist and Horsa. But unlike Hengist and Horsa, they did not burn libraries, they did not destroy whole cities, Alfred the Great and Athelstan that is. They certainly made sieges, but they did so in the benefit of the English people and the Welsh people as well. Against the Vikings, against the great army that I believe it was Guthrum had sent against them. I'll do more on that later in another video. But whereas the Irish and English had started off as enemies, now they were allies. They were allies against the Vikings and allies in the search for information. The ecclesiastical history of the English people was created by Bede, an English monk who had Irish teaching, and he weighed the earth accurately, even with the tools that he had available in the migration age, the post-Roman era. And he wrote about all the events that I've just spoken about, and also contributed to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which was a year-by-year account of all the events that happened from the time of Julius Caesar, when it was Gildas writing, a Welsh monk, up to the point where the English started to contribute to it. And these different manuscripts were brought together by Anne Savage and in modern times to create this book, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which I'll just show you. The other book I've used in this series is The English Warrior. England is a territory carved out by military conquest from the decaying corpse of the Roman Empire. A unified English kingdom was born from the struggle of various small Anglo-Saxon kingdoms against Scandinavian invasions, who the English eventually overcame and absorbed. Today the Vikings have a strong image in popular culture, while the victims turned conquerors remain largely unknown. This series offers an examination of the life and times of the English warrior from continental homeland in the 1st century through the period of migration and conquest, local internal struggles and the Danish wars to the slaughter of the English leadership at the Battle of Hastings.